Hey, welcome back to the Cruise Elite podcast. Tony, what's up?
Good morning, Taylor. I got blue colored glasses now.
You're working through the colors. Nice.
I'm working through the colors. And then, I just wanted to share this real quick on the episode. I had texted you about a week ago or so because I tried the red ones that I had while I was editing during the day. And I'm not joking when I say that lasted all of 2 minutes because, and I've never really experienced something like this, I got extremely uncomfortable. Like extremely uncomfortable to the point where I was like, I want to take these off. Like, I don't want to wear these while I edit. And I had to like get up from the computer and walk away. And so I don't know how much of that is me getting in my own head or not, but it felt very...
What time did you wear them? What time of the day?
It was probably, usually I'm editing in the middle of the day. So like around noon or so or something like that, which is different because I had worn them like to read at night or to scroll on my phone at night. No issues.
Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe it was time of day. I mean, color can have, it's just like anything else, but because it's your visual system, color can do that. You can find high payoff colors. You can find ones that, regress you a lot or make you feel lousy. One of my best friends, actually, when he puts on the red, he always feels nauseous. Red doesn't work for him.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fascinating. I mean, it's just so strange to feel something like that so strongly.
Yeah. Imagine if your bedroom or your editing room had red walls.
Yeah.
That would not be good.
Yeah.
Color can matter. It's interesting. I mean, that's very activating for the sympathetics. Red is.
Yeah, and you had texted me and you were like, maybe try blue. Like blue might have like the opposite effect or something. So I tried blue. I didn't like that either though. And I think what I've decided is maybe it's an acuity issue, but like when I'm looking at a screen, I don't want anything. I don't want the pinhole glasses. I don't want the red.
Totally,
The blue wasn't the same. I just, struggled to really like, it's pretty dark. So I struggled to like really see the edits.
Yeah. So your next little experiment could be using color when you're strength training.
Okay.
I think you'll have fun with this.
Interesting.
It can be mind blowing. Like,
all right.
Like throwing on the right color lenses during whatever strength exercise, you can have wild improvements in strength and stability.
All right.
And you would just test it. You would just test it. Let's say you're doing, let's say you're deadlifting. You deadlift, you're getting warmed up, kind of know how things feel. You know what your performance is like with certain amounts of weight. And then you put on the glasses, and the first thing to do is probably check some ranges of motion. How are you moving? If you're improving, then it's likely you're going to feel some level of difference. You can just play with it like that and throw on the colors and see if there's any difference. I've seen bizarre improvements in strength and stability just by adding the colored lenses. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I'm definitely going to try that out. And old trusty, my injured, quote unquote injured, my cranky knee at this point.
Yeah.
I should be doing the assessments with color too and just see what happens. Because
totally.
That one tells me a lot. If that improves versus gets worse, I know what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. You absolutely could use it. I mean, it's a very useful tool for dealing with pain issues and mobility restrictions. And it's so easy. You just put them on, see what happens.
Yeah.
It doesn't really take any special assessments, Listen to this one before we get going. This is crazy and sort of relates to what you just said in terms of the sensitivity of the nervous system and kind of the specificity of that. So we just got back from a 5-day camping trip and up in about an hour north of here. It was great. Got a nice little reboot. We had no cell service. It was cool.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, I got the detox, with, just phone went off, kept it in the car. And yeah, we were camping with some friends. It was great. So we did a lot of, I did some fly fishing, was kind of doing some rock hopping along the rivers. And it just requires a lot of agility and balance. And a lot of times when I do that for a long time, sometimes my hips can get like tight from the constant bracing and balancing on like big boulders. When we got home, I started noticing some tension that kind of freaks me out, because anytime my threat bucket gets like really spilled over, if you will, my output, the signal that my brain and body uses to get my attention, is sacral tension. I've talked about it in previous episodes where like I have a history of sacral issues and once had really bad sciatica, including an injury, sciatic nerve injury. And so when I feel those sensations, I start freaking out like, oh, I don't want to go down this road. It's like my brain's way of really getting my attention, and it works. So anyways, long story made short, I've been racking my brain a little bit trying to figure out some drills to help me with this tension going down my left leg. And, it kind of feels like it's sacral, but a lot of the radiating nerve tightness, like neural tension, was in the back of my knee, kind of at the top of my gastroc. And it was very limiting. Like when that's like basically the tibial nerve branch, when it gets irritated, not good for me. Sets off a whole cascade of problems. So I'm playing around with different things, finding some relief with different breathing drills, finding a little relief with some vestibular drills, walking better, but still not fast enough for me. So finally I was like, all right, I tried some tactile things. And what I noticed was like the nerve was getting more irritated with some of the things I was trying on my knee. So I decided to be like much more precise and do what's called pressure checking on the back of my knee, which essentially means I take one finger, touch a certain location on the back of my knee, and then while I'm touching it, I recheck some ranges of motion to see how I feel. It's a really wonderful assessment tool in the moment to kind of get an idea or get some clues as to what body areas might be important for improving, mobility and pain. So I found a location that was pressure checking well. And I did some stuff with the skin. I tractioned it in all the cardinal directions of the compass. I found some relief. Then I took the skin, I folded it, like pinched it, pulled it away from my knee, and that actually increased my neural tension. So I knew that my nervous system didn't like that. So I went back to pressure, and it seemed to like pressure. So I went upstairs, I got some voodoo floss. I wrapped some voodoo floss around my knee, and I had some relief. But afterwards, I felt that neural tension possibly getting a little bit more agitated. So I bailed on the neural tension. I was like, okay, I need to get more precise. So I'm ripping through boxes that we haven't unpacked yet from when we moved. And I found some of Alicia's acupuncture stuff. And she's got these really cool, I don't even know what they're called, but they're essentially little, they look like a tack, where imagine like a little circle on a sheet, like you would take a sticker off a sheet. And when you take off this sticker, there is literally a very small acupuncture needle sticking out. We're talking very small. So I just had Alicia pressure check my knee. And I was checking some ranges of motion. And then she touched an area on the back of my knee, and I didn't really feel it that well. And I was like, oh, are you touching my knee right now? And she's like, yeah, you don't feel that? And I was like, not really. And then I rechecked, and I had a much better range of motion. So Alicia jabbed this little acupuncture needle into my knee, and it hurts when it goes in, kinda, but then it doesn't hurt and you don't even feel it. It's just this itty bitty little tack that does penetrate the skin, but like in a way that's probably not even measurable to like you wouldn't see it and go, oh, that's sticking into you. Dude, one needle. And I walk away, run down the stairs, start getting ready for the podcast. I'm doing all this stuff, and I'm like, I can't believe it. This neural tension's gone. I'm walking better. I'm running up and down the stairs. Yeah, that was just before this call. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, the precision and specificity of the nervous system's crazy.
Yeah.
One needle.
Yeah. What's your working theory on what happened there?
So it's possible that like it could be a map clarity thing. It might, I might have, because the area has been sympathetic for so long, I might have a little sensory issue there because I couldn't feel, the pressure checking that well. It could be that we're palpating fairly close to a branch of the tibial nerve that's irritated, and possibly putting that little sensory stimulus there is is decreasing threat.
Mm-hmm.
Several things have gone through my mind, but it's just crazy.
Yeah.
One needle. And it's just amazing because if we were to do like a whole thing with needles, we'd probably have like 15, 20. I mean, some people work with so many needles and it took one.
Yeah.
It's crazy, but it's cool.
And what's really interesting about that too is you had tried a bunch of other stuff in terms of tractioning and applying pressure.
Exactly.
And it was actually agitating it.
It agitated it, and pressure gave me the clue because the pressure was assessing well. But when I did the voodoo floss, and which voodoo floss will add pressure, but it does it over a broad area.
Right.
And sometimes that can be great, but not for this. For whatever reason, my nervous system was like, not cool, because I started feeling more pain afterwards. So then I just got more precise, and I was like, okay, pressure is appreciated here. So when you think about sensory stimulus, you kind of, we do this in the Neuro Dojo. We teach our students what sensations are related to what spinal tracts. So how that information is transmitted through the spine. And pressure, when it's like a deeper pressure, is categorized with other sensations that are more like crude touch, or even cool, like cold sensation. And it's a different spinal tract than some of the other ones like vibration and light touch. So crude touch, which crude meaning putting a needle in the skin. Okay. Pressure gave me the clue that I was close. I stayed in the same spinal tract with my sensations and added something that was more crude touch, and that ended up being excellent. And it probably needed to be more precise than like broad, a broad coverage of the voodoo floss.
I also wonder with the voodoo floss, you're tractioning in a certain direction, right?
Yes.
And I wonder if that tractioning was threatening.
So
whereas,
yeah, it's possible. That's a great thought. I did directional testing on the floss. So I turned my skin inward, and that didn't assess very well during my initial range of motion check. I then tractioned it outward, and I got a much better assessment. So I wrapped the voodoo floss outward.
Yeah.
So it was helpful, but it wasn't really what I knew could happen. So I just bailed on that idea and switched ideas. And man, my nervous system just really needed a very isolated, input. It was very, very bizarre to experience that.
I'm just imagining you like ripping through these boxes, like throwing all these different tools out behind you, like trying to figure out the perfect one for your pain,
I was asking Alicia, I'm looking at these things. I'm like, what does 0.1 mean? What does 0.5 mean? She's like, that's, those tell you about the diameter of the needle. So of course I just was like reading them. I'm like, 1.5, that's the biggest one.
That's funny.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I'm going to keep working with it and hopefully put this tension to rest.
Yeah, I'd love to hear the updates. You mentioned something interesting earlier about the red colored glasses, and you were saying how activating it can be to sympathetics. And we talk a lot about the parasympathetic system. I think it's one of the more popular topics that I've seen people engage with when it comes to applied neurology. Everybody wants to activate the parasympathetic system and use the parasympathetic system. And we have a whole episode about that where we talked about it specifically. But I thought it would be really cool to talk about the sympathetic system, if that's even how you refer to it. And without covering too much of the same ground, because I know they're two sides of the same coin in some ways, talk about why sympathetics can be useful, when activation is useful as opposed to parasympathetics, which is bringing things down.
Right.
And just to get to know that side of the coin a little better, because I do feel like it's often villainized in
big time,
like the pop science space. And just to get your take on sympathetics as a whole.
Yeah, it's a great idea. And you're right, it is often villainized. And I think that's probably because how many people are focused on trying to decrease stress. So then you hear about the sympathetic nervous system as being, the one that becomes elevated when we are dealing with stress. And so most people are interested in decreasing that stress, which would be about, more of a parasympathetic response.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, as you're saying there are reasons why you would want to increase your sympathetics on purpose. We can talk about some of those reasons. And yeah, we'll talk about the fact that the sympathetic nervous system is not something that you really want to villainize, right? It just is, right? The whole nervous system function as a whole is all about balance, right? So you want balance between sympathetics and parasympathetics, and that's what your nervous system is constantly trying to achieve. But there is a time and a place for elevated sympathetics, and there's a time and a place for our parasympathetics to then take over. So let's cover some basic neurology real quick to give people hopefully kind of a visual that they can think about with how this typically works when we talk about or look at sympathetics in regard to what's happening with movement. Those of our listeners who have listened to the episode that we did not too long ago on the neurology of movement, this will be a little bit of a review, but we'll use slightly different words because there's going to be more discussion around sympathetics. So you guys already know that, for example, when I move my left hand, that's a voluntary movement. And as we talked about in that episode, if I make the decision to move my left hand, that is going to come from my right cortex. So I move my left hand, my right cortex becomes active. And we talked about, in this case, the left cerebellum being primarily responsible to help me coordinate that left hand movement. Whatever I need to do accuracy-wise, cerebellum is going to help me do that. So when your right cortex becomes active with a left-sided voluntary movement, your right cortex is going to fire down into the PMRF. We talked about the pontomedullary reticular formation, and this is your brainstem. And your brainstem is, basically where a lot of our autonomic control comes from. It's also where a lot of our muscle tone and posture comes from, and it even plays a role in inhibiting pain. So when the cortex fires down into the brainstem, there's an area at the top of the brainstem called the midbrain. I usually refer to it as the midbrain. The fancier name is mesencephalon, but this is at the top of the brainstem. So when the cortex is active, doing its job well, it sends signals down into the mesencephalon. And the mesencephalon essentially has some connections to something called the IML, which is the beginning of the sympathetic nervous system. So when the cortex becomes active from movement, it fires down in to the mesencephalon. There's some IML activity now that's generated, and that's where the sympathetic outflow begins. Okay? So then you have the reticular formation, which is the other divisions of the brainstem. And here's how I want people to think about this in their mind. As the mesencephalon becomes active, that's where your sympathetics are starting. I want you to think about that as the accelerator. And the job of the reticular formation, like the pons and the medulla, the other part of the brainstem, is to apply the brakes. So the mesencephalon is the accelerator. The pons and medulla apply the brakes. All right, and this is all to create, hopefully, balance. Okay, that's the key. Balance between these structures so that we're not too much under the dominance of sympathetic activity or too much under the dominance of parasympathetic activity. However, sometimes we need to be. Examples of that would be athletic performance or a very stressful situation, a survival situation where you want your sympathetics becoming extremely activated, right? Because that's how you focus on the task at hand, and you want your sympathetics elevated in a, let's say, athletic situation, but not too much. We can talk about that. You don't want to be overrun by it, but you get the idea. There's a time and a place for that elevated sympathetic activity.
So, a lot of people refer to fight or flight in that
Right.
high stress situation. And, it makes sense. It's like, okay, everything's activated. Either I'm going to run as fast as I possibly can, and get away from danger, or I'm going to face danger head on. But either way, you're amped up, right?
Yes.
When you were talking about moving your hand, it occurred to me that your sympathetic system might not only be working in those fight or flight situations. It's actually there all the time when you are moving.
Totally.
Is that true?
Yeah, very happy you brought that up. So all movement should elevate sympathetics, right? Sympathetics is not bad. So if we exercise, whatever it is that we're doing, we do a bicep curl with our left arm, we have to have autonomic control for that, right? So if things are working properly and our cerebellum is talking back and forth with our opposite cortex, and our opposite cortex is firing down into the mesencephalon, the pons, and the medulla, that if everything's working properly, we're getting appropriate autonomic support, which means our brainstem is basically figuring out how much blood supply to send to the working musculature, and also how much blood supply to send to the stabilizing muscles. So if you look at like the neurology of this, when the mesencephalon becomes activated from movement ipsilaterally, and it also then starts to create some activation in that IML column, the IML actually also sends information across the midline to the other side of the body. So you do get this effect where your brainstem is now trying to figure out how to kind of divide up the blood supply needed for movement. Okay, and that's the autonomic control. You don't think about it like this when you're, let's say, lifting weights. You don't think about, oh, my body.
Send blood to bicep,
yeah, exactly.
please.
Yeah. Send activity to these muscles so that they can work properly. Send blood flow, to the extremity. Like, we don't think about that stuff because, well, that's autonomic function. It's all reflexive. You don't need to think about that. You have reflexive systems that do it for you. So yeah, that's a really important distinction to make, is that all movement, if things are working properly, will elevate sympathetics.
Oftentimes we're looking for access points, right? Like if I want to target a system, if I want to target the vestibular system, I might do one thing. If I want to target the parasympathetic system, I might do another thing. Would movement be one of the primary ways that you would access the sympathetic system then?
It could be. And it will be different based on the kind of movement, the intensity of what you're doing. And there are a lot of structures that we can specifically target as far as our neuro tools go, that actually are very useful for activating the mesencephalon and increasing sympathetic tone, which is cool. And I should say this before we can get into that. If you have a PMRF issue, which we often find that people struggle in this area, in the pons and the medulla, for various reasons. Remember what I said about sympathetics becoming active? The mesencephalon is the accelerator. The pons and the medulla is going to act like the brake system. If you have an issue at the level of the pons and the medulla, they might not be able to do their job properly and inhibit that sympathetic activity enough. And that's when we kind of get this sympathetic escape where things are becoming imbalanced and we are more under the dominance of that sympathetic tone because the pons and medulla is not applying the brakes. So in a situation where you're trying to actually calm things down and down regulate, a lot of times we look to the pons and the medulla for that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, we can activate cranial nerves or do vision and vestibular work that's relative to those areas that we want to target. But it also can work in the reverse. Believe it or not, I probably see this much less, but you can be more parasympathetic in nature, and it can actually be very difficult for some people to generate that sympathetic activity. In fact, I told a story in the introception episode that we recently did, where I had a client that had a really hard time elevating their autonomics.
That's right.
And this is the woman who was on the stationary bike pedaling as fast as she could. And some things would change, like in terms of the effort she was putting into it, but her heart rate really wouldn't elevate.
Yeah.
And she was very parasympathetic in terms of her nature. And it was very hard to get her, fired up enough to perform well.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, currently, my wife has a client like this too that she's worked with her for a number of years. Just by nature, she's more parasympathetic. So part of the goal in the warm-up is to actually use these neuro tools with this type of person to elevate sympathetics.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it is.
So like, and I don't want to go down a rabbit hole of like medical conditions or anything like that, but like if someone has is exhibiting like lethargy,
mm-hmm.
where they're just like very low energy, they don't want to do anything,
mm-hmm.
is that potentially a lack of sympathetic activation? Or could lack of sympathetic activation be a result of that, maybe?
Yes. Yeah, probably a result of, in that scenario, a lot of times we want to look to the cortex
mm-hmm.
and do some things there. But yeah, absolutely. There are some history findings. So that I would probably look to the cortex a lot in that scenario. In the reverse scenario, with people that are potentially dealing with like heightened sympathetics more than they want to, you can see that in a number of different ways within assessments and history findings. An increased blood pressure, especially like ipsilaterally, is also partly an indication that the PMRF is not doing its job properly and inhibiting that sympathetic tone. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we might do at kind of a more advanced, a more advanced assessment form is to take people's blood pressure on both sides to see if there's any difference.
Mm-hmm.
If one side is, let's say, 5 to maybe 10 points different and higher, that may be indicative of more of a PMRF dysfunction where it's not doing its job to inhibit that sympathetic tone. So that's one. Yeah, that's one idea. And you can look at things like pulse rate. An increased pulse rate will tell you that there may be more sympathetic tone than you want. And there's other things too.
You mean like a resting pulse rate? Or?
Yeah. Yep. And a decreased perfusion index. If you've ever put like a perfusion indices monitor on your finger, it tells you a little bit about blood flow to the extremity.
Mm-hmm.
A decreased perfusion index may also point to increased sympathetics. This one's a bit more, anytime you look at vitals, it's very individual. So you wouldn't necessarily look at these things once and then draw conclusions. It's better to look at them several times. If you have clients, you want to kind of see where they're living with these numbers for a week or two, and then you get a better idea what's going on. But yeah, generally speaking, decreased perfusion index tells you sympathetic tone is elevated and you're not getting as much blood supply. And a lot of times your clients will suffer from cold hands and feet, right? Or cold nose. And that's also a finding, as far as sympathetic tone goes. And then there's some other interesting ones like an enlarged pupil. So there are times where like one pupil can kind of blow up and get large and the other one doesn't. You're not really going to see this very often, but I will tell you, if you're a health and movement professional, if you were to see that, that might be a referral.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes that
Feels
can
like a
be,
red flag.
yeah, that'd be like a red flag. So it's good to know about those things so that you can, you can make some good decisions for the people you're trying to help. That would also be an indication that the sympathetic system is under a ton of stress.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
We've done a lot of discussion about down-regulating sympathetics via the parasympathetic system. Things that come to mind are like tongue exercises
Yeah.
or jaw stuff, like things that connect to that region of the brainstem.
Mm-hmm.
If this is sort of like a symmetrical system, right? Like one balancing the other, would we inhibit those same areas sometimes if we wanted to focus on activating the sympathetic system?
Yeah, that's a clever question. You could, you absolutely could. That would be pretty detailed work. You could inhibit other senses. I think that when it comes to activating sympathetics,
Mm-hmm.
so I guess I should talk about some of the useful tools for doing that,
Yeah.
for activating sympathetics. So it's actually vision training is a really good one,
Mm-hmm.
particularly vertical eye movements. So because of the involvement of cranial nerves 3 and 4 with eye movements, which those nerves are going to be activated a lot because most of your eye muscles are supplied by cranial nerve 3.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially all the vision work that you might do would be very stimulating for the sympathetic system. You can get more precise with that. Convergence work, right? Where you follow a moving target in towards your face and your eyes have to converge,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whether that's like to the bridge of the nose, the tip of the nose, that will do different things in terms of the nerves.
Oh, interesting.
Cranial nerve 3 is going to be more active when you go to like the bridge of your nose. So like a pure convergence versus the tip of the nose where the eyes are going like more down and in. That's going to start involving more cranial nerve 4. But the point I'm getting at is if you look at where those nerves originate, guess what? They originate in the midbrain, where we
Mm-hmm.
said at the beginning is where the beginning of the sympathetic nervous system is. So just knowing that alone, that neuroanatomy, you can understand how eye movements, and a very big variety of them, could be very activating for the midbrain.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so eye movements, and particularly vertical ones, because of the involvement of cranial nerves 3 and 4, but also the convergence and also like near-far jumps,
Mm-hmm.
where you're focusing on something close and focusing on something far. That near jump is a lot of cranial nerves 3 and 4.
Mm-hmm.
So the eyes are an awesome way to start to activate sympathetics. It's also why sometimes vision work can really stress people out and increase their pain.
Mm.
Because if you have pain that is already driven by high sympathetic tone, which a lot of people, that's their situation.
Yeah.
Doing vision work isn't always the right answer because elevating sympathetics more can sometimes increase pain because of threat and stress. So that's important to know. Another really interesting category that you can use for purposely increasing sympathetics is breathing work. But it's very different from the type of breathing work that most people are exposed to, which is generally more down regulatory in nature, like laying down, taking deep breaths, generally focusing more on a longer exhale than inhale. That's all going to be more parasympathetic in nature. So if we change the style of breathing exercise, we actually breathe faster on purpose and involve like the upper chest area. So we have some interesting breathing drills that we take out on occasion. One of them is called burst breathing. And burst breathing is just a style of rapid breathing. Obviously, our listeners can't see me, but it sounds like this, where I'm going really fast, sniff in through the nose, really fast kind of puff exhale through my mouth. And
that was really musical, by the way.
Yes, I was about to say it makes that rhythmic that rhythmic sound. So burst breathing. We also have a really cool one that I originally learned as Russian breathing, and I think a long time ago it was called maybe endurance breathing. It came from some old Russian coaches, and man, this one's really bizarre and very hard to learn how to do. And there's 3 different levels to it. You can essentially do this style of breathing with the like upper chest in almost like clavicle area, and then you can kind of do like a mid-level around like the rib cage, and then you can do a lower level which is more like the deep like abdomen. But this one's interesting because you're standing when you do it and you bounce when you do it, and it's similar to the burst breathing. However, the idea is to use a rhythmic bounce to create some kind of elasticity, if you will, through the body. This combination of sort of body dropping and using gravity to essentially compress the lungs allows you to do a somewhat more efficient breathing pattern that sounds like this. And it's almost wheezy in nature. It's not supposed to get super wheezy, but it does often sound a little bit. And what you're doing is you're bouncing at the same time. The breathing rate is much faster than, what you would do with a traditional breathing exercise. And you're using that body drop to help create more of a reflexive inhale and exhale. So it's like the movement helps drive the inhale and exhale. Takes a lot of skill. It took me several months to learn how to do this well. And actually, I was practicing it today as I was thinking about drills for this podcast, and I just tried it and I was pretty rusty. I need to get back into it because it's actually quite useful. I've always felt good from it. But it's an example of using a kind of faster rhythm with breathing on purpose, and even utilizing a certain area of the body to do it. Because remember, when we get into our parasympathetic breathing drills, we typically hear people say, oh, you should belly breathe, or you should expand the ribs, right? We don't teach belly breathing. That's kind of gone out of style now. It's more about like 3-dimensional expansion of the rib cage, but it is lower in nature on the trunk. And we try to get away from the upper chest breathing patterns habitually, because you don't want to be a upper chest breather all the time. But we can purposely do that if we want to elevate sympathetics. And that's where our more rapid styles of breathing come into play. This is often what I have my athletes do in their warm-ups, is more burst breathing and Russian breathing, fast breathing that is rhythmic. And it is really good for elevating sympathetics, and I think an awesome thing to incorporate in a warm-up.
Yeah, very cool. I know I mentioned this in one of the earliest episodes, but there's this guy, Wim Hof, who is making the rounds on the podcast circuit, I think.
Oh, yeah. He's been making the rounds. Yeah.
Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe he was the author of a book about him. Either way, some of the claims he was making was with a faster type breathing. He was able to regulate his body temperature in really cold environments. Like, one of the things he would do would be like swim in ice water, or like climb to the top of the mountain in like underwear, and like not have any clothing to keep him warm. And he would just do these periodically. He would just, every few minutes, he would do this fast breathing. And
I've watched that documentary. And
oh, really?
I know a little bit about the philosophy and stuff, and it's really cool. And it's certainly it's a very in-depth practice, right? It's not like you learn this. I mean, although he does teach it to people quite quickly, it is still a practice, and especially the mental part of that, because there's like a level of resilience training that goes with it.
Interesting.
Because you're dealing with like cold water or cold weather, or holding your breath for a long time. And it's really interesting. And essentially the way he describes it is he has figured out how to, forget the words he uses, maybe something like tap into having some level of voluntary control over his autonomic nervous system, which is wild, really wild.
Do you suspect that he's activating sympathetics in a similar way in that situation? Or
So I don't know. I don't know all the breathing exercises that he teaches, but I know the general premise is generally a hyperventilation technique that generates a lot of oxygen, and to the point where some people actually hallucinate. Like
really?
they over
Wow.
oxygenate their brain and get all weird. Yeah, that can happen.
Interesting.
But his style then follows up. If I'm, some of our listeners might be like, "No, you don't know what you're talking about," and I really don't, because I have not gone deep into his method. But
Yeah,
I'm
fair
just
enough.
I'm just going off of some of the things I've seen and in the documentary and stuff. From what I understand, he follows up that hyperventilation technique with some level of breath holding, which then elevates CO2. So really, I think the goal is going back and forth and kind of balancing things out. It's not just hyperventilation, right? Because you don't want to, like, over oxygenating yourself is not necessarily a good idea, right? And so this is like this gas exchange is all about balance too. But his is kind of more aggressive in the sense that you do, the hyperventilation, and then you follow up with some breath holding to increase CO2. It's
Interesting.
very, very, very interesting stuff. For me, I'm not teaching people how to do those things, but I'm looking at, I want to understand to some degree the neurology of breathing so that I can understand what style of breathing does what.
Yeah.
Because I have targets that I want to hit. I need to know how can I use it for decreasing sympathetic tone with like slow, longer exhalations. Or the other side of that coin is sometimes I want to increase sympathetics. I have an athlete that I work with, and she's also one of those people that has a hard time increasing her sympathetics. And so she talks a lot about feeling very lethargic on the day of her races. And one of the things that we've incorporated in her warm up is a lot of fast breathing drills. A lot of the rhythmic fast stuff, like the Russian breathing, the burst breathing. We have another one called a breath ladder, which is a little bit more rhythmic. You have to keep track of your inhales and your exhales, but that style is really great in a warm up.
Yeah. So we've got vision drills, convergence,
Yep, vertical eye
and
movements.
and then we've got breathing, but not deep breathing, not parasympathetic
Right.
style breathing.
Right.
Faster, more rhythmic, more in the upper chest versus the lower. What about temperature?
So possibly. And let me just back up one step and say the other part of that breathing conversation is air hunger.
Yeah.
Yeah, air hunger. So we didn't say air hunger yet, but air hunger is a part of those types of breathing drills, and any kind of air hunger exercise is also going to be a way that you can directly activate the mesencephalon.
Yeah.
So temperature is interesting. I don't really use it like that, right? Going into a cold bath.
That'll
Right.
wake you up.
And
That's what made me think of it, actually.
Yeah, going into cold water. I mean, that's the combination, right? That a lot of people like using is the faster style breathing, right? Plus the cold water immersion. And that would be very elevating for sympathetics. You know what's interesting? I was thinking about this when I was just prepping for the podcast. Sometimes there's a reason, and I have experience with this, and so does my wife, Alicia. Sometimes there's a reason to purposely elevate sympathetics only to create the parasympathetic rebound. So an example of this, and my wife does this all the time, because Alicia is she's more sympathetically hardwired, right, than I am. I'm much more sympathetically hardwired as soon as I get to my boiling point. but it takes me a while to get to that boiling point. Alicia's just kind of hardwired to be a little bit more sympathetic. And so sometimes if she's struggling with feeling like she's a little too fight or flight, if you will, whether that is feeling stress related, maybe she's having trouble sleeping, you know what I'm talking about. Just things are Things are more elevated than you want. There's a feeling that goes with that.
Yeah.
Okay. She will purposely use this idea of increasing her sympathetics so much that then her system has to rebound. And when it rebounds, that feels really nice. So one of the ways that we do this is with BFR training, blood flow restriction training. I get a great result from this, and she does too. Very simple for us. Mostly it's just something we do at home on the stationary bike. But BFR, if you've ever done it, is super uncomfortable. You essentially put tourniquets around your legs or your arms on purpose, not too tight, but there's a whole protocol. You got to learn, you got to know what you're doing. And there's a lot of sensation that comes with it. Not only the wraps being on your body, on your legs that are cutting off, some circulation, but there's a lot of fatigue in the muscle that you get from doing this. And so it's just plus the movement, it's a very sympathetic activity. And we do it a lot of times with air hunger work on the stationary bike, whether that's like nasal breathing or like breathless work where you hold your breath after exhaling. And we'll do this for, 10 to 20 minutes or whatever. And it's extremely stimulating, right? Because of all that sensation. And then you take the wraps off. And honestly, for me, it's pretty standard. Like about 2 hours later, I'm like, wow, I feel so nice and relaxed.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's that rebound. And it's Alicia does that a lot, and with success. And it's interesting how you can use it strategically that way. And I've recommended to other clients in the past that they try that, and it's worked well for them too. And these are generally people that run too stressed. But this is just kind of like a manipulation, if you will, where it's like, okay, let's do more to generate more sympathetic tone, only to force our body to rebound later.
You know what that makes me think of? It's like people in the tropics who drink hot tea to cool down. Have you heard of this? It's like, in Europe and the US and stuff, we like to put ice in things to cool down, like a nice ice cold lemonade in the summer.
Yep.
Whereas like, maybe in India, they might be drinking a hot tea because it's really hot out. And what does that do? It gets their body going, it gets them sweating, and it actually cools them down.
That's interesting. That's one of the things that Igor showed me so long ago. He was a big hot tea drinker.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, always with meals too, like after meals, but then also in the evening. Yeah.
It also makes me think of, that feeling after a hard workout where it's like you've suffered a little bit, you've put your body through something, and then afterwards, I don't know if it's endorphins or what it is, but like you just feel great. Like problems aren't as heavy anymore.
Totally. That's essentially what I'm describing, is that feeling. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really, I like it. It's a useful way to approach things. Something we should talk about, since we're discussing, sympathetics and parasympathetics, and I know we have a lot of listeners that are very active and even, some competitive athletes. When you are preparing for your best performance, right? Whether that's actually competition or just in practice or whatever, you want to make sure that your warm-up is designed around elevating sympathetics. Okay, at least most of us do. There might be some people that could benefit from some down regulation before performance, right? Everyone, people can be different, but most of the time we want to elevate sympathetics because we want our sympathetics to be elevated for our best performance, because that's how your body performs at its best, right? When all those senses are heightened. And it's really interesting because traditionally we've all learned, those of us who have played sports our whole life or whatever, we all learned that we should stop what we're doing to warm up, maybe sit on the ground and start stretching. And stretching, we're generally trying to relax into a position, see if we can go a little further, maybe do some deep breathing at the same time. And there are still to this day tons of professional athletes that think this is how you should start your warm-up before a competition. It actually doesn't make a lot of sense, because stretching traditionally is what I mean. Get into a position, a posture, feel the stretch sensation, take a deep breath, try to go a little further. This is a very parasympathetic activity. The stretch of the muscle and the connective tissues and the way that you feel that is very much an insular activity. We talked about C fibers in the interoceptive conversation in one of the last podcasts. And those types of things are very vagal in nature and more down regulating. And so now you're combining breathing, generally a relaxed, longer exhalation, with trying to further a position with a stretch sensation. And what you have is a very insular type activity, right? A lot of vagus nerve activation, a lot of down regulation. And you don't necessarily want to do that before you want your best performance, which is why I never have people stretch before performing. Most people. Some people, because they run a little bit more sympathetic by nature, it could be useful to do some things to down regulate, especially with like nervous energy. That could be beneficial. But generally speaking, when we warm up, rather than, laying on the ground and stretching your muscles and relaxing into positions and doing that kind of down regulation type stuff, you want to do stuff like the breathing exercises we talked about, and vertical eye movements, and vertical vestibular vertical head movements for activating your vestibular system, and working on stuff like that to get all those systems kind of primed and ready to go, and to elevate your sympathetics. It's interesting to think about it that way.
Yeah, I mean, what you're doing is you're applying a neuro lens, to these practices and saying, okay, what's actually happening when you sit down and stretch and deep breathe before you perform? Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah, and you'll see, athletes. I think it's going to be a long time before people think like that, maybe, but even still to this day, you'll see professional athletes bending over and stretching and doing a whole routine. And is it going to hurt you? No, I'm not saying that, but like, is it the best use of your time before you want your sympathetics elevated?
Yeah.
So
if we have a minute, I'd love to talk about light.
Sure.
And circadian rhythms, because much is made of the idea that, it should be dark when you go to sleep. When there's light coming in the morning, you tend to wake up faster.
Yeah.
In the morning, you tend to have more cortisol.
Yeah.
You tend to be more in that sympathetic tone. And I just wanted to get your take on all of that. Is light ever a tool you use to activate or deactivate? And then how much do you think about circadian rhythms at all in your practice?
Okay, I have two different, like, my mind goes in two different places. So there's light science, with circadian rhythms and, the sun and all that. Is certainly not my expertise. I'm interested in it. I would be interested in that if I was working with a client who I thought was really suffering with their circadian rhythm, and generally, people who are getting poor sleep. I think it would be quite important to start to go down that road. And I know for myself, it has been quite useful to strategically use my red light therapy. I'm still currently really working on my sleep habits right now, and I'm winning, actually.
Nice.
I'm really winning. Yeah. And moving was a big part of this for me, because we left a living situation that was much higher stress for a lot of reasons, but we also suspected that there was a high mold content.
No, yeah.
And so anyways, my sleep was not nearly as good when we were living there. And now we're really settling in here, and I've been using my red light strategically. I try to use it either at the time the sun is rising or setting. And I personally get a nice effect from it. I have noticed consistently that it helps my sleep. But the cool thing is, this new living situation, we now can go out in the backyard. Like last night, we go back out in the backyard and we get to watch the sunset, which is a totally new thing for us.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I do, and this is like exciting for me because I've never really been able to easily integrate something like that into my life.
Yeah.
I make sure that at that point in the evening, I don't have my contact lenses in. And then we go out in the backyard. My daughter's playing and stuff before bed. And now I get to watch the sunset and get that very important end of the day light into my retina, which plays an enormous role in setting circadian rhythms. So if I don't get the sunset, if we don't do that for some reason, I made sure to use my red light. And lately I've been able to get a lot of sun in my eye at that time, which is cool. And that's been super useful for me, for sure. Now,
fascinating.
Yeah. Now, the other use of light. So I use light as a tool with neuro work all the time because one of the ways to actually test cranial nerve 3 is to shine a light in someone's eye and see what the pupil does. Because cranial nerve 3 has a lot of roles in terms of the muscles that it innervates. And they're all related to the eyes. Mm-hmm. So not only do you have ocular muscles that move the eyeball that are involved, that cranial nerve 3 is involved with, but cranial nerve 3 also innervates the eyelid and also plays a role in the constriction of the pupil when light is present. So one of the ways you can test cranial nerve 3 is to shine the light in someone's eye, and it's not like super direct, but you got to learn how to do this. We teach our Neuro Dojo students how to do this, and I literally just use the light on my phone, and you just shine it in someone's eye, and then you look and see what the pupil does, and it should be constricting and responding appropriately. Now, light itself is activating for the sympathetics. So that means we can strategically shine a light in somebody's visual field, and guess what? We get to choose. This is why neuro is so cool. You can shine the light in different areas of the visual field for different reasons to activate different things.
It's like peripheral versus foveal.
Exactly. Yes.
Near field versus far field.
Yep. And even like top and bottom of the visual field have more correlation to like either the parietal lobe or the temporal lobe. So like there's a lot of cool stuff that you can learn that allow you to construct drills the way that you want to do them. But simply put, shining some light in a person's periphery, but it's entering the eye, is sometimes a really, really good tool for helping people with vision issues. So let's say you have a cranial nerve 3 deficit and your eyes are not moving the way that we want them to. Let's say your convergence is lousy. Mm-hmm. So your eyes converge in, and then all of a sudden, whoop, your right eye leaves the party and isn't doing what you want it to do. We might be able to take some light stimulus and shine it in the person's periphery to start to stimulate cranial nerve 3 more. And then we notice, oh, okay, convergence is happening better. So then at that point, we would use light as a tool, and that would be a part of their drilling. Mm-hmm. So I use light a lot like that, both for assessing and drilling.
Yeah, but not necessarily to activate the sympathetic system, more to assist with visual proficiency, which also has benefits in all other areas.
Correct. Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. Very cool. Final thoughts on sympathetics. I know we probably left a lot on the table here.
Yeah, there's a lot. Well, it's interesting with applied neuro. It's hard for us to know whether a structure is overactive or underactive or how it's going to respond to a certain stimulus. So you really have to be a detective and assess people and try different things to see, what's right. I encourage people to try some of these activations and see how your body responds. And even if you are working on a pain issue, you can still try some of these things because it doesn't mean that it's wrong. Sometimes if the mesencephalon becomes overactive, as we might say, that sometimes means it needs more of the right stimulus.
Interesting.
So it's hard to. This is where it gets a little bit tricky, and you have to you learn a lot through experience. But the way the brain works, from a survival standpoint, is when a structure is not doing its job well for a long period of time, your brain will often oversensitize those neurons so that it can receive more stimulus more easily to keep other neurons alive. It's a survival tactic, if you will. So this is why sometimes people feel like they're stuck in fight or flight, right? Because as the sympathetics become active because of inputs that they're not receiving, right? They kind of feel stuck in this fight or flight state. Sometimes we have to continue to activate, right, to get the results that we want because there's missing input, right? So it's a little bit of a challenging one, and so we can activate sympathetics on purpose and still see decreases in pain, and we can still see increases in strength and mobility. But like I said earlier on, it's not always the right choice, because if a person is been in a sympathetic state for a long time and they are highly stressed, like I said, doing a bunch of vision work might not be the right idea, because that might kind of spill over their threat bucket. So there might be a different entry point.
Yeah.
And this is why knowing your neuroanatomy is so important, because there's other ways to activate, let's say, the mesencephalon. And one of the ones we did not actually talk about was sound stimulus and something interesting called tonotopic mapping. And it's a really fun drill. And you can try this with a friend or significant other, and it will tell you something about your auditory mapping skills. But basically, you have the person stand in the middle of the room with their eyes closed. And then you, the coach, are going to tell your client or your friend or whatever, I'm going to snap my fingers, right? And I want you to point to where you think the sound is coming from. But remember, their eyes are closed. And you can kind of work these different quadrants and get creative and make it a fun game. And the person has to, as soon as they hear you snap your fingers or clap or whatever, they point. And now here's how it works. If they're accurate, great. You say, nice, whatever. And if they miss by, let's say, 5 inches or more, and you'll see a lot of misses, you say, open your eyes. They see how far they missed by. They use visual information to then correct their accuracy. Then they close their eyes again. So they just learned something. And then you start maybe working that area a little bit more, getting them to make more accurate predictions of where that sound is. It's a really, really great drill. And it's also related to the sympathetics in the sense that this skill is related to an area that is located in the midbrain called the inferior colliculus, where a lot of sound processing occurs. Sound processing is like routing through it.
I would have called it the superior colliculus, but that's fine.
And so this is helping to train that. And so sometimes what we see is that people can have like a really difficult time with this, and they have to start mapping. They have to start creating a better map, right, with the sound stimulus, and it can be really, really, really useful. And we take it to the next level because at that point, we already kind of know what side of the brain we want to activate. And so then we can have them point with the correct side. So, for example, if I produce sound stimulus on a person's right side, and they're going to take in more of that sound input on the right, I'm going to be getting a lot of left-sided cortical activation. If I have them also point to the sound with their right hand, now I'm activating their right cerebellum and their left cortex again. because the movement's coming from that hemisphere. So the way you construct the drill can kind of respect some of the other things you know about their neurology. It's a neat one. It's like a game, right? And people have a lot of fun with it, but it is something that we have done a lot with folks in the past that seem to either just seem to have some blurry maps related to sympathetic tone.
There's a fine line between clarifying the map and reducing threat and activating threat, or filling the threat bucket. And your story from this morning at the beginning kind of puts it into perspective. It's like you tried all of these different interventions, some of which helped a little, some of which actually made it worse, and you needed a very specific way to activate that part of the back of your knee to get relief.
Right.
And with sympathetics, it's the same, right? Like you can't necessarily use a blunt object and just raise your sympathetics and hope it'll be good.
Right.
Like you've got to figure out a way in that isn't threatening.
Exactly. Finding that entry point is always really key.
Yeah.
Really key. Speaking of that knee, man, you just reminded me that little tack is on the back of my knee.
Right.
I haven't felt I haven't felt any neural tension in my leg doing this episode with you. So that's a good sign.
Yeah.
All right, there it is. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode on the sympathetic nervous system. And hopefully you can kind of understand now how sometimes the goal is to activate the sympathetic nervous system. Now would be a good time to remind you all that our free Neuro Master class is coming very soon, on the 19th. And this is a limited time offer. So make sure if you're interested in joining me for this masterclass that you use the link in the show notes to sign up, because once we do this masterclass, it will not be offered afterwards. So here's the thing. If you can't make the live event, don't worry about it. Just make sure you are registered. And as long as you are registered, we will send you a replay. So that's happening on the 19th. And then after the masterclass, we will open up a 10-day enrollment for the Neuro Dojo. I know so many of you guys are fired up and excited about that. So lots of great stuff coming down the pipe. Thank you so much for listening to the episode. And I just want to remind you guys too, if you'd be so kind to leave us a review on the podcast. It really helps. That's it for today. We'll be back soon.